In this episode of my Mind-Body Connection series, I'm going to talk about what it looks like and feels like to accept the fullness of your trauma so that you'll recognize it when you're in it and have increased trust that you will not only get through it, but you'll be better off for having processed it. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below and we'll get back to you personally. In addition, you can join my weekly group membership meetings, reserve your place in one of my seminars, or purchase any of my mind-body guides, also known as the PDFs, at www.crushingdoubt.org. Now, without further ado, here is what it looks like to accept the fullness of your trauma. The column system gives us 3 ways to understand our symptom life, and along with it, ourselves. But each column has a very different process, and sometimes we need to work in multiple columns to be able to see what is really happening. I often tell people to locate the primary column of the experience because that will dictate the broad structure of what you are going to need to do to make quick progress. If your emotions column is the primary driver of the moment, you need to find the broad theme that applies to that moment, and you should be able to have a good sense of these if you have built out your emotions column themes. From there, you can look at the timing of the acute onset or uptick and figure out what it is in the present that is mirroring things from the past. Do that, and you can get rid of the emotions column symptoms function, which is to distract you from the emotion at hand. If the doubt column is the primary driver, as would be the case with a symptom that just seems to be stuck in the same place for a long period of time, or so recurrent that it is what I call consistently acute, you have a different set of variables with which to deal. Now you need to observe, articulate, and counter the thoughts you are having so that you can move the symptom off of the consistently acute status. Once you've done that, your doubt column work is done, and either symptoms will go away, or you can now attack them in more emotional forms. Working with symptoms in emotional life, though, actually comes in 2 forms: the emotions column, and what I call the emotions column on steroids, the power column. The emotions column is for use when a present emotional moment really upsets you in a way that is reminiscent of the past, but not hitting you in such a global way. It reveals the importance of the moment, but does not carry the weight of the arc of your life. But some moments are not like that. Some moments are not only upsetting in an emotions column sort of way, but they hit much harder. These are power column moments. The power column is for use when we hit a plateau in recovery and need to know more about ourselves. This means we need to receive the message about our own history that we've always known, but with which we haven't wanted to fully reckon. But the power column is also used to recognize when something is emotionally out of whack with ourselves at a much deeper level. This is why one of the tasks of the power column is to measure the current moment against the core narrative experience. Now, we are not only looking to see which emotional themes are active in that moment, but we are also seeing how they relate to the overall picture of our core suffering self. Sometimes we will need to identify that not just by knowing what emotions are at play in a given moment, but whether or not we are in power in that moment. The emotions column brings us necessary awareness, and that is enough to alleviate the acute symptom. The power column, though, brings us awareness in a different way. What we see here is so big and so full that it requires more than just awareness. It requires action. This action could be internal only, or could require some external action, but whatever action is taken, we can get to alignment with the self through this knowledge. The emotions column is kind of like a warm-up to the power column emotions. The emotions column brings the power of awareness over symptoms, while the power column brings awareness that does more than just alleviate symptoms. It alleviates distress with our whole experience of life. In the emotions column, we get in touch with our emotions and can use the information, but it stays rooted in that moment. In the power column, it connects to the very core of our being. Symptoms that emerge there are still emotional in nature, unlike in the doubt column, which only goes towards emotion when fear comes up, and even then the emotion is secondary to the distressing thought. The doubt column is all about how thoughts lead us astray and cement symptoms. When we remove doubt effectively, most of the symptoms that are left are about emotional life in one form or another, and the deeper we get, the more everything moves towards the power column. Living well in the power column is the end goal. At that point, we have little doubt and no chronic symptoms, and have greater awareness of our emotions, and as such, have great control over our acute symptoms. But what about when you're in the process of a power column symptom? Here, you are going to find you need a much different understanding and approach. Yes, We still need to process emotions, but the awareness alone is not going to get rid of the symptoms. In fact, in the power column, the goal is not to get rid of the symptoms. Much as we would all like to not have symptoms, power column symptoms require that you receive the communication. That cannot be done if you are trying to get rid of them. When you recognize that you have symptoms that are power column driven, the roadmap to getting rid of the symptoms is different. Now you have to let them be there, so that they don't revert back to moment-to-moment emotions column experience, in which the distraction hides the communication. The function of power column symptoms is to finally spend time where it hurts, so that we can actually process it and not have to reinvent the wheel over and over again. I'm always straight with all of you, so I will say here that it is, in the moment, the least satisfying processing of symptoms possible. It lasts longer, it hurts more, and it really isn't nearly as quick. With the emotions and doubt column, symptoms can be eradicated in seconds when engaged in the right way, not in the power column. In the power column, you cannot accept the fullness of your trauma so quickly. But you won't have to do this kind of processing that often. It's only when you're processing the deepest of traumas that you're doing that kind of power column work. Not only that, the good news is, it is still moving at light speed compared to therapy, let alone when people are left to their own devices and avoid the knowledge. For some, for their whole lives. In the power column, you're going to need both of the other columns to be more settled before you can do that work. You've got to know your themes and be able to have the awareness, but you also need to have mastered doubt enough to not get sucked back away from power. In essence, the power column is where we take an unflinching view of our life in the past and what we hope for in the future. By clearing away all doubts and giving up the emotions column distractions, it's all right in front of us. And we've avoided it our whole lives because we thought it would hurt too much, or that it would last forever, or that it would reveal something horrible that isn't what we want. But it isn't about revealing something new. It's about revealing something old that we have always known, even if our bodies are the only part of us that fully remembers. The core narrative allows us to use this unflinching view and to understand our core suffering self, as opposed to all of the other parts of our identities. When you see those first two sentences of the core narrative, it is likely to make you sadder and angrier than you've ever been, because you are finally caring about you. Self-empathy is so important to have, and this work is going to get that for the rest of your life. But at first, it comes from being empathic about the fullness of our trauma. It's what we all did not want to see or accept, but putting that off was only putting off living our lives in ways that align with ourselves. When we don't accept the fullness of our trauma, we live by its rules. When we do, we see ourselves clearly and won't lose sight of it again, provided we do the work of the power column at this stage. So, what is it you have to do at that point? This is the hardest part. You don't have to do anything along the lines of what you've been doing. You've done it. What you need to do now is wait. You need to sit with it and know it will not last. It's like a mourning process. In fact, it is a mourning process. You are mourning the person you used to be before the trauma, because you were never the same after. Here is where it is important to listen to people who have been through it. And by that I mean people who have accepted the fullness of their trauma, processed it, and come out the other side. It does not mean they have to have lived through or understand your trauma. I've done this once, and I'm actually doing it again right now. Having done it once is a great advantage. I am far less scared this time. I am far less worried that this is all for nothing. I'm 100% convinced that I am now going to put this to rest, because I'm not dancing away from it. The symptoms in this context are merely a sign that the processing is happening. They do not matter much otherwise, because not only do I know what they are about, but I know they won't last. They just last longer than the symptoms of the other columns, because their function requires receiving the message, and that takes more time. How much time? Not as long as you think, but not as short as you'd like. Generally, processing the fullness of your trauma will take a few months. It does not usually last longer if you've got it well organized and understood. This is a time when you might need a therapist to help you process or sit with it. It's a hard time, among the hardest of my life when I've been in it. And believe me, I want it out nearly every step of the way. It takes determination to get this work done, but when it's done, it finally is done. Trauma continues to influence our experience in its profound nature, but it doesn't have to influence our present-day experience and symptom life anymore once it's integrated. That is what accepting the fullness of your trauma looks like. You now know, without any doubt or minimization, what happened to you. It's not about feeling sorry for yourself. It's about clarity about your reality. You know what impact it had on you. And now you're mourning it. Don't be afraid if it's taking some time. Don't be afraid if power column symptoms linger. The deeper you go, the less work you have to do later. Keep doubt out of the way and link emotions to the big picture of the power column. Stay on it, even if it hurts like hell. As one of my favorite people likes to say, there's gold in them hills. Stay there and trust. You've been hurting this way your whole life. Stick with this and you'll never hurt the same way again. Finding the you that comes after the trauma is always worth it. I really hope you enjoyed this episode on accepting the fullness of your trauma. If you haven't already, click subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, hit like if you like what you're hearing, and put your comments below, and we'll get back to you personally.